On May the 5th, a ceasefire deal offered a glimmer of hope for peace in Gaza, but as celebrations ensued, Israel launched a deadly ground assault on Rafah. This event has sparked a complex geopolitical maneuvering, with Hamas, Israel, and the United States at the center stage. Join us as we delve into the intricacies of this unfolding situation. Hamas, which is the group in control of the Gaza Strip, has drawn a lot of criticism from the United States and Israel for interfering with the progress of ceasefire talks. The most recent Hamas move has been an ingenious tactic that outwitted its enemies, and now the U.S. and Israel are indirectly compelled to react. If they do not succeed to a lasting ceasefire agreement, it would only put Israel as the actual obstacle to peace and the U.S. as an untrustworthy mediator. Israel and the U.S. are trying to pull the wool over the eyes of the global community with some stories that are not compelling enough. The first version says that Israel had no idea about Hamas's proposal, but the other version states that the U.S. does not support an Israeli operation in Rafah. While they acted surprised, it can be assumed that they had a clear idea of what would happen on the day of the election. This twist of fate will now make Israel and the U.S. the focal point, and it will be a time for them to be questioned on their real intentions and commitment to peace. If they do not take advantage of this chance to declare a ceasefire, it might weaken their place in international affairs. Israel has refused the draft of the deal as it wasn't aware of the new terms. On the other hand, it is also alleged that CIA Director Bill Burns, who took part in the negotiations, has been updating the Israeli side. It is hard to imagine that President Joe Biden would broker an agreement that doesn't take into account the interest of Israel, which he is known to support. However, the U.S. government asserted that it is strongly opposed to any Israeli ground operation in Gaza. However, this position did not stop the operation, and the Biden administration's response was to downplay the issue rather than condemn it. The spokesperson for the United States National Security Council, John Kirby, alluded to the fact that the operation was not the full-scale invasion that was anticipated, but rather limited in scope, implying that he was aware of the Israeli plans. In 1982, Lebanon witnessed a significant aggravation of tensions as Israel launched its invasion of Lebanon. At the beginning, Israeli Prime Minister Menachem Begin tried to calm the anxious parties, saying the operation will be limited in size. It was stated that the Israeli military would not advance more than 40 kilometers deep into Lebanese territory, and that this was to be aimed at striking the positions of Palestinian armed groups that had been attacking Israel from across the border in the north. Although the first statements were about the limits of conflict and self-restraint, the real situation is completely different from what was announced. The Israeli soldiers did not stop their march at the point which was agreed upon, the 40-kilometer mark. However, the group kept moving, and they even reached the capital of Lebanon, Beirut, a city that is 110 kilometers away from the border. The objective of the operation was greatly and unexpectedly changed from the one that was officially announced, which gave rise to questions both regionally and globally. Having carried out its extended mission, the Israeli government tried to provide the legal framework for the deviation from its original declared limits. Officials referred to the changing conditions on the ground as the reason for extending the military operation and the presence. This argument, to some extent, was backed by personalities like then Secretary of State Alexander Haig, who was advocating the Israeli view. Nevertheless, the Israelis' arguments were not taken seriously, as those who were against them concluded that there was a gap between the stated goals and the actual operations that were being carried out by Israeli forces. The Israeli military occupation of Lebanon, which went beyond the initial borders of the operation, led to a chain of consequences that were not very favorable for the region. It fanned the flames of the tensions, resulting in an extended conflict with numerous factions inside Lebanon, and caused the international community to condemn the aggression. The consequences of invasion and occupation, which lasted for years, caused a ripple effect in the Middle East that resulted in a complex landscape which is still being felt today. While the U.S. has not publicly told Israel to stop anything during the current Israel-Gaza conflict, the U.S. has called for a ceasefire. Some people doubt that these warnings are a sign of criticism and if the U.S. is still Israel's unconditional supporter. There are signs that the American side is considering the possibility of postponing the delivery of weapons to Israel to make them stop bombing Rafah so much. However, it is difficult to ascertain if the current support is genuine, considering the past support the U.S. has had for Israel. The idea that the U.S. is comfortable with Israeli soldiers being on the Palestinian side of Rafah's border with Egypt is frightening. This is the most alarming part of the story, which is that the operation was supposed to be limited. Once Israel had taken over the border, they are concerned that the aid they required will not be delivered in time. Egypt was also offended and took the attack as a provocation. They do not just influence the current generations, but also the future ones. They also reveal how the U.S. is one of the countries that are in the conflict of Israel and Palestine. It is very important that everyone, and particularly wealthy countries, should concentrate on assisting civilians and looking for peaceful ways of resolving the problems. Egypt has always emphasized that the Philadelphia Corridor Protocol is violated by Israel soldiers being on the Palestinian side of the corridor. The purpose of these agreements is to keep the area free from any military presence. The agreement was negotiated at Camp David in 1979 with the assistance of the U.S. It was meant to be the last nail in the coffin of a conflict between Israel and Egypt. Then, in 2005, they also used the Philadelphia Protocol after Israel pulled out from Gaza. Egypt had to abide by the same principles. While the administration of Biden may consider that criticism is being managed by describing the Israeli invasion of Rafah as limited, the occupation of the crossing violates a treaty supported by the U.S., showing that the U.S. and Israel are ready to disregard agreements they've signed. It aggravates the doubts about the American efforts to let Israel escape the legal consequences for its actions in Gaza, and this is a violation of international law. U.S. officials have devalued UN Security Council resolutions, calling them not binding. They have also criticized the International Court of Justice for its recognition of the situation in Gaza as a possible genocide. Furthermore, Israel has been issued with the threat of sanctions against the International Criminal Court if it issues arrest warrants for Israeli officials. These steps in turn cause doubts about the U.S. faithfulness to the rules of international law, as well as about the equal treatment of all parties involved. The current situation is that many people are sure that President Biden may fail to be reelected in the November election and, as a result, leave behind a bad record. His term of office could be remembered as the period of the Gaza humanitarian crisis and the erosion of the international legal system, which might have been the first step towards more conflicts. Nevertheless, this is a time frame to alter the direction. Biden cannot simply be a bystander, but can really and truly apply pressure on Israel to agree to a permanent ceasefire with Hamas. Such a plan would see the complete removal of all Israeli forces from Gaza, the lifting of the blockade to permit humanitarian supplies to enter, and the commencement of reconstruction. With the developments of the case, it is obvious that the relationships between Hamas, Israel, and the United States are at a turning point. The conflicting narratives in the global media landscape are shaping the perceptions of the world, giving Gaza an uncertain way to lasting peace. We will be sharing future updates as we continue to track developments and their influence on the global arena.